March the 2nd, 2022. Well, I guess the topic today, to begin with, will be the President Biden's State of the Union address. Kind of effort and fantasy, you might say. I mean, it's sort of detached from a lot of reality. I guess he made a nice statement about the Ukrainian situation, even though, in my opinion, it was his policies and failed diplomacy that led to the disaster that's hit Ukraine. Um, and Of course, I've talked about that in several previous videos, so we don't need to belabor that. The rest of it, I mean, it sounded like a big dose of spend, spend, spend. I mean, we're in a highly inflationary environment, which will probably get worse because of the international conflict. But in the meantime, it's spend for this, spend for that. And I mean, some of the things, I guess if the people that are going to receive the money might be happy about it, but it just doesn't seem to be a rather coherent policy to carry forward in this environment. And it's sort of like, well, but whatever. I mean, there are some points that, you put a few things, you kind of blunders into it. Yeah, that makes sense. But a lot of the rest of it is just sort of more of the same, build back better without the term build back better. And so that's not very likely to succeed. His general idea to help the economy is to tax the corporations more and a variety of other things, and I guess anybody with any money. And then this fantasy that nobody below a certain level of 400,000, which is pretty high, is going to get a tax increase, which of course his policies would actually increase taxes on people below that. Of course, it wouldn't be necessarily the tax that he's talking about. It may not be the income tax rate, but there'd be other things that would affect that. At any rate, if you like these videos, please subscribe, give me a like, and and any comments would be appreciated. Yeah. So that's kind of where we're going. One of the things that's most annoying was his comments on the border and on the whole fentanyl crisis issue. I mean, this open border is a complete. I mean, it is Biden administration policy. It's not a failure to act. It is an action. The action was deliberately to open the border, and I think over 2 million illegal immigrants have come in since he's been president. I mean, this is completely his doing. This is not some kind of it just happened and I don't know what to do about it yet. And first of all, I mean, talking about, well, we'll have some sensors or this or that. I mean, the first thing you want to do is complete the wall. I mean, the border barrier is what you need first of all. Then sensors are good to detect anybody that gets through the wall or over it. And then, because at least it'll slow them down. And then instead of having your entire border patrol tied up, basically helping illegal immigrants get positioned in the country, you'd have them actually capturing and deporting them. All this would be kind of useful, but guess what? No, he's just going to go back to some bromides about sensors or something, which, by the way, there are sensors. Funding was available that could be put in on the areas that we do have walls so far, and he's not done it. It's just total deception. And hopefully most people will see through it. I think they probably will. These State of the Union addresses usually give the president, no matter who the party is, a little bit of a short-term bump, but ultimately reality seeps back in within a few days, and people begin to realize, that was a bunch of hooey. So that's kind of my reaction to that speech. I mean, other than misspeaking, I think did he actually say Iranians instead of Ukrainians? That's what I heard anyhow. I'll see what somebody else ends up thinking about that. And I don't know. Of course, being Joe Biden was relatively poorly delivered, and I think at the end, yes, I think he was saying go get him, meaning that the people in Congress, his supporters, should pass his bills. I don't think it was about targeting a specific individual, even Vladimir Putin particularly. But so I don't think he's. On the good side, I guess he's not prepared to actually declare war on Russia. I mean, literally go to combat, which is what a lot of these proposals been thrown around would essentially entail. But yeah, okay. So another State of the Union address, and now we're on. Most of these things won't become law. It's normal attack on the Second Amendment and gun rights, and that sort of thing, and. And yeah, I do agree with the idea, like, why aren't we actually using existing laws against criminals in possession of guns? I mean, there's certainly plenty of arrests with people who are prohibited persons with guns, and not only that, but in the process of committing criminal activities that are not being prosecuted to the extent they could be. I think this would deter a lot of this supposed gun crime everybody's talking about, which there is, it's out there. But I mean, there's so many criminals that clearly are breaking the law that with guns that are really being, let go, and I even let go without bail. I mean, so this is another farce that somehow regulating the law abiding is going to somehow keep the non-law abiding better in check. Completely nonsense. Well, at any rate, that's kind of that. And of course, there's an ongoing debate about the nature of sanctions on Russia and so forth. And I don't know whether or not complicating people coming to and from Russia is going to help anything or not. I mean, I guess they'd have to fly to China first now or something, and then or some other country that hasn't banned air flights from Russia, and then basically, or else go on American Airlines. I guess I don't know if we have any lines that fly there. I don't know about flying there. I have no intention to, but especially not now. But I mean, what I'm saying is that this is, uh, one of the things that was in there is, I think that's another thing. And of course, everybody can pour out their Russian vodka if that makes you feel better. Anyhow, but that's kind of the way that ended up. So anyway, so much for State of the Union, and the economy is still in the state it's in. And I want to mention this. He takes credit for the new jobs, but of course, as you open up the country and all the COVID restrictions go away and the pandemic goes away, of course, the economy to some extent starts recovering. But I don't think it was any particular policy that he came up with that did it. In fact, his policies mainly are in, probably holding back the recovery, because I mean they gave out a lot of free money up through about September of this year, and of course that probably had the effect of saying, why go back to work if I'm getting money just sitting here for not working. I think a lot of those very negative COVID pandemic policies have finally gone away, and it's going to take a while for things to creep back to normal, but I think they're probably moving in that direction. Okay, get off on that subject. I guess we a little also do a little bit of an update on the situation in Ukraine. Seems to be the last video I did on that was basically that basically Russia was bogged down, and they still seem to be somewhat bogged down. But it's obviously clear now that they realize they're not coming as friends, and so they're becoming as enemies, and they're starting to engage in very destructive artillery barrages on cities, and just nasty attacks, and it probably is going to get worse, because essentially Ukraine has armed everybody, including their grandmother and their kids, with rifles. So it's going to be very unlikely they want to just go in house to house. The casualties would be pretty tremendous probably on both sides doing that. But so they're just going to start bombarding things apparently at the moment. Very terrible situation. I still think this could have been avoided with a smarter type of diplomacy, but it wasn't, and now we have to live with what is. I think that I don't know. It's unclear what's going to really happen on the going forward. We have this massive line of Russian armored vehicles and trucks heading toward Kiev, which seems to be just stalled there. I think partly because I think the Ukrainians smartly blew up some bridges, and I don't know, maybe they don't have bridging equipment, or maybe they really did run out of fuel. Although given the distance they had to drive down a road, I wouldn't have thought that would have been. No, maybe they just had to run the engines too much while they were sitting there while being held up for this or that. But it looks like the planning was kind of like terrible on their part, which will probably be to the Ukrainian defense's benefit. Although eventually they probably will get through, and they do seem to be moving ahead in the southern regions much more effectively. Certainly, I think it's hard to know, what the real, I think, situation is. There's a lot of propaganda. I mean, you can't believe hardly anything the Russians say, obviously. I mean, and I think the Ukrainians themselves are probably putting out a certain kind of propaganda, which is along the lines of like, everybody is out there totally fighting the Russians. Well, there's a whole bunch of people heading for the Polish border, and they're not fighting the Russians. So, uh, I think that if I use an example, I don't know if I mentioned this before in a video, but I use the example of like the American Revolution, where about a third were patriots, about a third just didn't want to get involved, and a third were Tories and basically ran out of the country one way or the other, decided themselves to exit, and a lot of them are what we can now call Canadians. so, so you see what I'm getting at? That there's I wouldn't be surprised, given the mixed ethnicity of Russian and Ukrainian in Ukraine, that there isn't a lot of that going on too. I suspect Russia's popularity with all the bombing and shelling has gone down among all groups, but at the same time, um, any ethnic Russians are probably, if they're thinking a step further, going to realize if the Ukrainians completely win, they're going to be not the most popular people anymore, are they? So you see what I mean? So they may be ultimately a little bit of mixed emotions there, perhaps. I don't know. At any rate, the thing is a disaster. There's no doubt about it. And although there's a lot of talk about cutting off use of Russian oil, I don't know how that works out too good and gas, natural gas particularly, because Eastern Europe is so much dependent on it, particularly, and the Germans' foolish denuclearization program has made them even more dependent. I mean, yeah, Britain can stand strong because they have their North Sea resources, but and France has its nuclear energy. But I mean, as far as the rest of these outfits, they really can't, I don't think, afford to simply go cold turkey on Russian energy. Now, on the other hand, in the long run, Russia may have really done themselves in, because in the long run, there are alternate sources in the world. And those sources can be developed and eventually brought into Europe, and therefore the dependence on Russia can be reduced systematically, which will reduce Russian revenues. So in the long run, they may really have hung themselves by doing what they've done. That's why I call it strategic defeat in one of the previous videos. I mean, I think that they've really isolated themselves from the world economy, and I don't know. It's unclear at this point, even how China is going to relate to them. Although, I mean, you have to remember, I think China is still dependent on Russians' technology for some of their defense items, still like engines for aircraft, I think. So I'm not sure whether they're going to completely, you know, turn on the Russians at this point. They're probably going to play middle ground for a while, just so as they don't get in the line of our ire too much. But that's another interesting thing. I mean, this is all the things that China does, and they get almost nearly not a bit of the blowback that Russia's getting. But nevertheless, Russia does deserve it for what they're doing now. There's no doubt about that, and hopefully we can keep the risk of an escalating war down and bring this. I think that still, like I predicted, it ultimately ends up that Russia's downfall here is the guerrilla war that occurs later. I mean, I don't know that that this is a stable situation, and they would have to keep almost all their army in there even to hope to occupy it. I mean, and this is so I think this is probably going to lead to big long-term detriments, but we'll have to see. There's always this guy, Colonel McGregor, and if you've heard him, he seems to think that the Russians really just want to take the western part of the country and almost partition it. That is an interesting idea. Another unrecognized country, or I don't know exactly how that would work. But it is true that there have been no major Russian troop movements yet into really western Ukraine. And of course, that's the area where the weapons that are being supplied by various countries that we've heard a lot about that are now being supplied would be coming in through those areas, through Poland and through Romania. So, we'll have to see what happens there and what moves occur next. Any rate, that's about it for now. Like I said, I do have my the rest of my social media there. I noticed that this new truth thing, I've signed up for that, the Trump thing, see what he's going to have on his platform, but I haven't seemed to be able to get into it yet. I'm on some kind of a waiting list. So we'll see how that turns out. At any rate, so I'll wrap this up for now, and until next time.